Amen. You may be seated. Earlier in the week, I talked with David about the service today. And for reasons that will become obvious in the next few minutes, I asked that we do a bunch of gumdrops, those songs that have been so important to this family of faith for the last 24 years, ones that bring tears to my eyes. And you know what? That David delivers. Thank you, dear friend. It's nice to be anonymous. Nobody knew that any better than young King Solomon. When he journeyed to the little village of Shunem, which was located in the orchard country over by the Jezreel Valley in Israel. Shunem was a quiet little town, a pastoral town, a place with people with simple values where honesty really counted. Of course, the people in Shunem had heard about their dynamic, handsome young monarch, but none of them ever saw him. They didn't have any pictures back then. They didn't have any faxes or Facebook or YouTube, and they didn't even have Saturday Night Live to make fun of the leaders. They had none of that. So they didn't recognize him when he came into town. Besides, he was supposed to be back in Jerusalem. But here he was in their town. And aside from a few telltale signs of affluence, a couple extra horses, some ornamented saddles, and perhaps a couple of golden flasks, they had no reason to believe that this stranger who just came into town was indeed their king. And maybe that's why the striking young Shulamite did not resist his attention. Maybe that's why she laughed at his stories. Maybe that's why she blushed at his smiles and lost herself in his eyes. One conversation led to another. One walk led to another. One touch led to another. And soon the two of them, the unnamed girl and the brilliant young monarch, were hopelessly in love. So Solomon wooed and won her and took that little country girl back to the big city. From a world of cowbells and apple orchards, he walked her into the splendor of flowing gowns and waiting servants and sounding trumpets and lavish feasts. A world of gold and silver. A world of power and prestige. We're talking a major transition here for that poor girl. From a sleepy little village to the seat of the government, just boom, overnight, one fell swoop. Talk about a rags to riches love story. That's exactly what this is. And I'm guessing, at least in the beginning, the girl loved it. I have these images dancing in my mind of this movie, Francie. Remember that? Oh, what a classic. Pretty Woman, starring Julia Roberts hanging out around that posh hotel, basking in that huge marble bubble bath, and riding on, walking on, and shopping on Rodeo Drive. Is that one of the greatest scenes ever in the movies? Big mistake, she says. Well, it was the same thing for this little girl from Shunem. King Solomon took the country girl to the big city. He took her out of her world to a world she'd never dreamed about before. But wonderful though it wasn't wonderful enough. Hence we come to this single verse around which our thoughts are centered this morning on this last Sunday of February. The king's new bride is speaking, and this is what she says, Francie. Stay me with flagons. Comfort me with apples, for I am sick with love. There's a coded message in those words. Let me explain. For starters, that word flagons up there in the first little phrase, flagon tells us a bunch about the whole event. According to the Hebrew, there are two possible translations for the word flagon, and both point to the same concerns. Francie? The Hebrew word is aishisha, and it means flagon. And a flagon is either a cake of raisins or an ornamental pitcher. Now, both betray the level of opulence with which this little country girl would have been totally unfamiliar. Only the most wealthy could afford these raisin cakes, and nobody from the back country ever saw one of those ornamental pitchers. Hence, with her opening phrase, the young girl is acknowledging the spoils of privilege with which she is suddenly surrounded. She likes it. It's good stuff, very impressive, but nice though it may be, it was not the key to her heart. If he really wants to bring her peace, he must do so by reaching backward, back to the basics of her childhood, back to the kind of thing that made a little girl giggle, back to the plenty not born of the hand of wealth, but of a happy home. She says, stay me with flagons, nay, comfort me with apples. In other words, she's saying all this stuff is nice, but my heart is still in the back country. The simplicities of the past take precedence over the extravagances of the present. If you really want to make me happy, she says, give me an apple. Give me a piece of my past. This February morning, I dare say the values expressed by this candid young woman ring true with most of us as well. In the final analysis, toots and whistles are wonderful things, but nothing's as good as the accoutrements with which most of us were raised. Raisin cakes are fancy and brilliant pitchers are sparkling, but set them to the side. Me, I'll take a Macintosh red every time. Like Solomon's young bride, my message this morning, this message, is centered in sentiment. Perhaps you sensed that special thread in the music for the morning. We chose it on purpose. We were handing you apples from the past here at Jupiter First, treasures from yesterday that still have a luster today. Stay me with flagons, nay, comfort me with apples. So when do we long for apples? When do we wish, maybe just for a moment, for a flash of the past to keep the present in perspective? For me, I long for apples when I feel what was important yesterday is becoming less important today. For several years now, I have been chagrined over the decay of the presidency in America. I'm not blaming any of our current executives, any of our chief executives over the period of time. But since the plumbers were caught in the Watergate building, you know and I know it's been open season on every American president. Granted, Some have been a lot easier to denigrate than others, but the cumulative effect of all this slicing and dicing has been a seriously compromised image of the greatest and highest office in the world. I find that very disturbing and very sad. I believe the world's most overwhelming responsibility deserves a high level of respect, no matter who holds the office. Comfort me with apples. I was really feeling funky about all this back in the late 90s, and all of a sudden the people at Columbia gave me an apple. Francie, remember this movie? Air Force One with Harrison Ford. I watched it 3 times just so I could remember what it was like to see dignity and daring and discernment all snuggled up under the strains of Hail to the Chief. May God so bless this nation and all of our presidents that without regard for their idiosyncrasies, the dignity of their office might be respected and revered. Comfort me with apples. Now, sometimes those apples show up in a more basic fashion, like the time when Barbara and I slipped away for a weekend at a wonderful little resort over in Sanibel. After making reservations for dinner, we walked into the dining room, an elegant place with gorgeous chandeliers and sparkling crystal and white tablecloths. Barbara looked stunning in a sleek black dress, and I was trying to be pretty with a sport coat and a tie. And they seated us at this little table for 2 with a beautiful candle flickering right in the middle of it. I'm talking perfect here is what I'm talking. But then they seated another couple at the table immediately behind Barbara. She couldn't see them, but I could. Probably in their late 20s. They were dressed on the underside of Florida casual. Not just comfortable, but sloppy, baggy, and wrinkled. And the crowning touch? Oh, it was a beautiful thing. This guy was wearing a Baltimore Orioles baseball cap backwards. And he did not take it off. Stay me with flagons. No, comfort me with apples. I know it's really a little thing, but tell me, whatever happened to etiquette? Whatever happened to the basic observance that gentlemen do not wear hats indoors? Whatever happened to honoring one's ambiance with the manner of one's dress? Tell you the truth, I wanted to get up and walk over to their table and make up a story that would go something like this. Pardon me, friend, but tomorrow I'm being sent on a special mission halfway around the world, and I may not be coming back. So tonight, I'd like to enjoy an elegant evening with my wife. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm very fond of the Baltimore Orioles. I love Earl Weaver, and I think Brooks Robinson was probably the best third baseman that ever played the game. And right now, I live almost next door to Jim Palmer over on the other side of the state. But would you do me a favor and take off that bleeping hat while I enjoy my dinner? Comfort me with flagons. Comfort me with apples. But still, lest we get overjoyous, we need to be careful. It's wonderful to be comforted with the apples of yesteryear, but let us be quick to note, this is not a condemnation of today's generation. Just because many of us can recall wonderful things from the past does not mean there are not wonderful things unfolding right now in the present. Furthermore, when it comes to owning up to the problems of our time, us gray hairs or no hairs need to take our share of responsibility. To that end, I came upon a remarkable poem the other day that seems to fit perfectly this morning, Francie. We read in the papers and hear on the air of killing and stealing and crime everywhere. We sigh and say as we notice the trend, this young generation, where will it all end? But can we be sure that it's their fault alone? That maybe a part of it isn't our own? Are we less guilty who place in their way too many things that lead them astray, like too much money, too much idle time, too many movies of passion and crime, too many books not fit to be read, too much evil in what they hear said, too many children encouraged to roam, too many parents who never stay home. Kids don't make movies. They don't write the books. They don't make the liquor. They don't run the bars. They don't make the laws, and they don't sell the cars. They don't peddle the drugs that addle the brain. That's all by older folks, greedy for gain. Delinquent teenagers, how we condemn the sins of the nation and blame it on them by the laws of the blameless. The Savior made known, who is there among us to cast the first stone? For in so many cases, it's sad, but it's true, the title delinquent belongs to older folks, too. So let me tell you about my return to a different apple orchard just a few months ago. I went in for my annual stress test, and as I was clogging away on the treadmill, my doctor was sitting there. He said, are you feeling any pain? Got any discomfort? I said, no. And I completed my exercise. And he sat down beside me. He said, well, there's a little dip here that didn't appear last year, and I don't like it. With your history, I think we'd be wise to do a cath and check it out. How about Monday? I said, how about tomorrow? So I'm sitting in the cath lab at Palm Beach Gardens Hospital when a nurse walks in and says, take off all your clothes and put on this gown. Now, some of you have known that moment. You know and I know, gown doesn't come close. Park your dignity at the curb. This is humility time. A basic cotton wrap with a panoramic rear view. I put the thing on and started chuckling as I immediately thought about that old hymn that Billy Graham and Cliff Barrows made famous a long time ago. When you're wearing a hospital gown, just as I am takes on a whole new meaning. Then as I was laying there, waiting, clarity set in. You see, when everything's on the line, it's amazing how what's most important becomes even more important. Nothing shuts down glitz and glitter faster than a hospital visit. Nothing gets us past the raisin cakes and fancy pictures faster than a blood pressure cuff and an IV line. There I was, Barbara at my side, aware yet again of the things that really matter. It's not titles or treasures or trinkets of any kind. No, when we really want to be comforted with apples, It all comes down to the people we love and the Lord who loves us. I thought about my kids. I thought about many of my colleagues over all the years I've been in ministry. I thought of many of you who have become so important to me over these last 24 years. And I thought of my 50-year partnership with the Master. I'm not a gushy Christian or even an obvious one. Once I take this robe off, I try to be just like the next guy, and sometimes too much, so I fear, but make no mistake. I am a believer, and I do trust that all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Comfort me with apples. No question, when it comes to nitty-gritty moments, faith becomes more important than ever. So let me leave you this morning with a few special apples. I told you this is a message about sentiment, the kind of sentiment that grabs my heart when I pass by a steak and shake restaurant like the ones I frequented back in my hometown. Or when I see those big billboards like the ones my father used to make alongside I-95. Or when I pick up the aroma of freshly mown grass. Or hear the sound of a bat hitting a fastball. All of these are apples from my past. So as I wrap up this message this morning, I invite you to just sit back for a couple moments. Try to remember the good stuff. Some of you won't have any idea what I'm talking about in these next couple of minutes, but a lot of you will. And for those who do, it's going to be a time of remarkably reclaiming great memories. I'm talking about hide and seek at dusk. Sitting on the porch, Simon Says, kick the can, and red light, green light. I'm talking about lunch boxes with thermos. I'm talking about chocolate milk and going home for lunch. I'm talking about penny candy from the store and hopscotch, butterscotch, and skates with keys. I'm talking about whist and Old Maid and Crazy Eights, wax lips and mustaches, Mary Janes, saddle shoes, and Coke bottles with the names of cities on the bottom of them. I'm talking about Howdy Doody, the Mickey Mouse Club, Rocky and Bullwinkle, Kukla, Fran and Ollie, and Spanky and the gang, all, of course, in black and white. I'm talking about not stepping on a crack or you'll break your mother's back. I'm talking about paper chains at Christmas, silhouettes of Lincoln and Washington, the smell of paste in school, and a fragrance called Evening in Paris. I'm talking about when it took 5 minutes just for the TV to warm up, where nearly everybody's mom was home when the kids got home from school, and not any of them owned a purebred dog. I'm talking about when you got your windshield cleaned, your oil checked, and your gas pumped, all without asking and all for free every time. And you didn't pay for air, and you got trading stamps to boot. I'm talking about when any parent could discipline any kid or feed him or use him to carry groceries, and nobody, not even the kid, thought a thing of it. I'm talking about when it was considered a great privilege to be taken out for dinner at a real restaurant with your parents. And when they threatened to keep kids back in school, if they messed up, they told them they were going to hold them for a grade for a year And they actually did it. I'm talking about when a 57 Chevy was everyone's dream car to cruise, to peel out, or to watch the submarine races. When people went steady and girls wore a class ring wrapped with Angora yarn to keep it from falling off their finger. I'm talking about the days when no one ever asked where the car keys were because they all knew where they were. They were in the ignition of the car and the doors were never locked. And you got in big trouble if you accidentally locked the doors at home because nobody carried a key for home. I'm talking about the days when everybody knew Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys, the Lone Ranger, Laurel and Hardy, the Shadow Knows, Nellie Bell, Roy and Dale, Trigger and Buttermilk, as well as the sound of a hand-pushed reel lawnmower on a Saturday morning. And I'm talking about when being sent to the principal's office was nothing compared to the fate awaiting you when you got home. Back when if we goofed off in school, we were in fear for our lives. But it wasn't because of drive-by shootings or drugs or gangs. It was because my parents held me a standard excellence that in the fullness of time would one day govern the very boundaries of my life. Do I love living in today's world? You bet I do. I'm thankful to be alive and be right here, right now. But if you really want to make me happy, comfort me with apples. What's the point? You know, it's really okay to treasure your past. It's part of who you are. And all those apples, well, just consider them a gift from God. Amen. Please stand to sing. Thank you.